First of all, thank you all for being here today. Particular thanks to Congressman Lewis, who has more than a busy schedule, and to our former Dean Dick Hesse, who will lead this discussion. Part of this law school's mission is social justice. Couldn't get a better speaker than John Lewis. And as much as I would like to introduce him, I'm going to ask Erin Corcoran, Professor Erin Corcoran, who's in charge of the Social Justice Institute at this law school, to introduce today's guest and the discussion that will follow. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the law school, and for many of you, welcome back. I know this is a big reunion for the class of 77, so we're really happy to have you here today. As John said, my name is Erin Corcoran, and I am the director of the Law School's Social Justice Institute. And I am just so honored to be here today with Congressman Lewis, whose lifelong journey and mission has been the pursuit and the promotion of social justice for all. Congressman Lewis currently represents the 5th District of Georgia in the U.S. House of Representatives and has held that seat since 1986. But for me, what I find personally very compelling about Congressman Lewis is his personal journey. He was born to, his father was a sharecropper and tenement farmer. As a young boy, worked on his father's land, and was moved and inspired by the words of Martin Luther King to stand up, and as he puts it so eloquently, get in the way. He was about standing up and promoting equality, pushing for change. He was an agitator, but yet only advocated nonviolence. And his willingness to stand up to authority, to challenge the existing law, the segregation, and the social structure was not without consequence. He and his fellow advocates were often on arm's way. He himself was beaten brutally by law enforcement. Many of his colleagues were murdered, but he continued to march on and demand equality. And I think for me, what's most astounding is that he continues to do that today. It has been his lifelong journey to challenge the forces and authority wherever that he sees inequality. He's been out in front promoting women's rights, promoting rights for the LGBT community. He does what he feels is morally right and stands strong. So I am so excited he's here today I hope that he will inspire all of you to stand up, get in the way when you are faced with inequality. So please join me in welcoming Congressman John Lewis.
You get to sit. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to begin with a few questions, and then you are all invited to join. If you have questions, we would like you to go to the microphone. Will the microphone be moved to the center of the aisle? The microphone will be over here. We have just one mic, so if you would like to line up behind the mic with the appropriate time, which I hope will come quickly, you're invited to do that. I would like also to point out that John Lewis's autobiography, Walking with the Wind, is available at the Gibson bookstore. Not exactly an ad for a local business, but for your benefit, the book is available and it is a great read. John Lewis is a great subject, but it's a great read. So you might want to be aware of that. If I could begin, I suppose you've had this question many times, but how does a 19, 20-year-old with the limited opportunities that you had by that time in your life, how do you become a member of the movement that became the Nashville Movement? How does that come about? that you were so devoted to that movement that you were willing to place your physical well-being on the line?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me say that I'm delighted, very happy, and honored to be here in the state, in the city, but more to be here at the University of New Hampshire School of Law. It's an honor for me. And I want to thank the dean and the faculty, and thank each and every one of you for inviting me to be here.
It's our honor.
Well, you heard it in the introduction that I grew up in rural Alabama. And growing up there, when we would visit different towns where I grew up, I saw segregation. I saw racial discrimination. I tasted the bitter fruits of racism, and I didn't like it. And I would ask my mother, my father, my grandparents, and great-grandparents many, many questions. They accused me of being nosy, really. But I was just, I wanted to know. I wanted to know why this, why that. And I saw those signs. I couldn't go there, I couldn't go here. And I wanted to find a way to do something about it. And I think Rosa Parks and Dr. King and others provided me an opportunity to try to do something about it. I was deeply inspired by the action of Rosa Parks, the leadership of Dr. King. Hearing his words on old radio inspired me. And I followed the drama of the Montgomery bus boycott. It took place only 50 miles from where I live. We didn't have a subscription to the local newspaper, something called the Montgomery Advertiser. It was a state paper. And my grandfather had one. And when he was finished reading his newspaper each day, we would walk by a half a mile to get his newspaper, to read it, to follow what was happening. And when I finished high school in May of 1957, I wanted to attend a little school called Troy State College. It's now known as Troy University. Submitted my application, my high school transcript. I never heard a word from the school. So I wrote a letter to Dr. King and told him I needed his help. He wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket and invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. And I went off to school to Nashville, been accepted at a little school there. Dr. King got back in church and suggested when I was home for spring break to come and see him. And on a Saturday morning, by this time of morning, I boarded a Greyhound bus and traveled to Montgomery. And a young lawyer, I never met a lawyer before, a young lawyer by the name of Fred Gray, who was a lawyer for Rosa Parks and Dr. King and the people in Montgomery, who later became our lawyer during the Freedom Rides and during the March from Selma to Montgomery, met me at the Greyhound bus station and drove me to a little church pastored by the Reverend Ralph Abernathy and ushered me into the office of the church. And I saw Dr. King and Reverend Ralph Abernathy, colleague of Dr. King, standing behind a desk. And Dr. King said, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" I was so scared, I didn't know what to say. And I said, "Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis." I gave my whole name. And so that was the beginning. And I knew then that I was on my way to getting involved in the Civil Rights Movement. And I had met Rosa Parks a year early at the Highlander Folk School in Montego, Tennessee. But meeting Rosa Parks, meeting Martin Luther King Jr. changed my life. And so I continued to study in Nashville, and was there that we studied the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. Studied what Gandhi attempted to do in South Africa, what he accomplished in India. Studied Thoreau and civil disobedience, and studied the great religions of the world. So we were getting ready to get involved in the sit-ins.
Well, if I can jump from the sublime to the ridiculous, how did it come about that you were dancing with one of Hollywood's great stars? Remember that?
Well, I do.
Shirley MacLaine?
Shirley MacLaine.
Yeah.
Yeah, Shirley MacLaine was a real supporter of the movement. And she came to Atlanta to visit the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee office and some of the staff. And we had a little party at my apartment. And a lot of the young volunteers came there. And she came. She was invited, and she came. And I danced with her. I'm not a dancer, but I tried to keep up with her. During those days, she moved very fast.
Well, now we'll open it up to you. I have, well, probably 5 or 6 hours of questions I would like to ask John Lewis, but this is your opportunity to converse with John Lewis. So are there questions? Would you go to the microphone, please? Yeah, you might want to study the roadmap here of getting to the microphone.
Okay. Want to go ahead?
Sure. Congressman Lewis, it's a great honor to have you here in New Hampshire. As a student of politics myself, what I'm curious about is the comparison between the time when you were in the movement and today. Part of which is if under the current media circumstances that we have today had been already in place in the late 50s and the early 60s. That is to say, in the 50s and 60s, there were 3 networks and a handful of newspapers from which the entire nation drew its news. If instead it was taking place at a time when there are multiple networks, including one that I would imagine would have been viewed the movement with great antipathy, that was viewed by 30% of the nation. I'm just curious about that moment in history of both our national history, the political situation, and the media culture that was surrounded, and how important that convergence was, and whether, if it was happening today, whether that would arouse the nation the way that it did in the 60s. Thank you.
I'm not so sure, but back during the late 50s and early 60s, it is my own belief that television, news, and the civil rights movement came of age together. The movement was dramatic. It was a lot of drama. To see a young man like Martin Luther King Jr. emerge, preaching the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence, or to see young students attempting to desegregate Central High, these 9 young people in Little Rock in September 1957, or to see young black and white students sitting in at lunch counters all across the South in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion. And at the same time, someone is coming up, spitting on them, pouring hot water on them, maybe putting lighted cigarettes out in their hair or down their backs. These well-dressed, orderly protesters winning a battle. To see people in Montgomery walking for more than 300 days walking, having a carpool system, rather than ride segregated buses. Seeing people taking their cases before local courts and not getting justice, but appealing to much higher courts, to federal district courts, to the United States Supreme Court. It was a lot of drama. And you had the 3 major networks. I guess about some of them, at the beginning, I guess they had like 15 minutes, and later half an hour. But if it hadn't been for the media, the civil rights movement, and especially television, would have been like a bird without wings. Because it was television and national newspapers like the New York Times, the Washington Post, Newsweek, and Time Magazine that sort of brought the issue home to people. And when people around America and around the world saw peaceful, nonviolent protesters being beaten, trampled by horses, chased by police dogs. They demanded that someone do something. And during that period, there was many, many members of the bar that responded. President Kennedy asked lawyers to create something called the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. And hundreds of lawyers volunteered at that time. When we were arrested in Nashville on February 27, 1960, 89 of us, students, arrested, went to jail for sitting in. There were many lawyers that volunteered at that time in efforts to defend us. And the media covered that.
And I just, my curiosity, because you're in Congress and you're very familiar with sort of the media environment today and how different it is from that in the, back then. I'm just trying to imagine, I'll be honest, how would Fox News have covered it?
Oh, I don't know.
At the time.
I'm not so sure they would have covered it.
If I may ask that we keep the questions relatively brief. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of people want to get to the mic.
Hello, Congressman. It's an honor. I've heard you speak. I've been in D.C. since '70, so I've heard you speak a number of times. You know, I'm really curious. You have a perspective now, obviously, for the last 50 years or so, and you've seen, you know, what's happened to the country. You were there during what appeared to be the worst years of discourse, perhaps, in the country. I'd like to know or see or hear your perspective now on what the country is going through and its total lack of discourse. You know, my vision of Washington is probably no different than most people, and that is it's gotten so ugly that it's you know, we're falling apart at the seams politically, and it's having the effects. What do you see now going on in Washington and in the country as a whole, and put it in perspective from what you saw back in the day? How bad are we now relative to how bad we were then?
We, well, during another period, we had the capacity and the ability to bring the dirt and the filth out of the cracks and corners, from under the American rug into the light, so we can deal with it. And I think we did. We had leaders with a little pushing and prodding moved. President Kennedy and President Johnson. There was a conscience, a coalition of conscience that came together during the March on Washington. People reacted to what happened in Birmingham. They demanded that the Department of Justice, demanded that the President, that the Congress do something when we were beaten on that bridge in Selma. And we did it without the technologies that we have today. It's all of this competition for to be on the front page or to be on television. We're much, in my estimation, we are much more divided as a nation and as a people. If you ever have an opportunity to come to Washington and visit my congressional office, you will see photographs that on the morning of the March on Washington, August 28, 1963, we didn't hesitate to meet with both the Democratic leadership and the Republican leadership. You have both Democrats and Republican leaders in the Senate and in the House that became committed to the question of civil rights, voting rights, and they led. During that period, many of our political leaders became headlights rather than taillights. And today, I think people maybe are just afraid of that shadow. Sometimes I think people, something is going wrong in America. And I don't want to stress this too much, but I'm not sure whether it's in the water we drink, the food we eat, or the air we breathe. But I think there's a mentality that some of us, we're just mean. And I don't think, we're not born mean. But I think some of us go to bed mean, we get up mean, and we're mean all day. And Dr. King used to say from time to time that we have to find a way to love the hell out of everybody. And I've tried during the past 12 years to take many of my colleagues back to Birmingham, to Montgomery, to Selma, to walk the path, to travel down the road that we traveled. And I had one member of the United States Senate from a southern state who said to me, after going on the trip for 3 days, he said, "John, if I had gone on this trip earlier, my voting record would be different."
Jim Varner. John, you know, back in the day, I marched with you and Dr. King and others for the right to vote and to get certain privileges that other people had. And I'm wondering what your opinion is as far as, or what your thoughts are with the upcoming election of President Obama. What role do you think the feeling that African Americans are inferior will play in the election?
Well, I think African American, and it's my hope that all voters will play a major role, that we all must get out and participate in the democratic process. I'm a strong believer that the vote is the most powerful. It's not just powerful, it is precious. It's almost sacred. But it is the most powerful, nonviolent tool or instrument that we have in a democratic society. And we have to use it. If we fail to use it, we can lose it. I think too many of us, too many citizens, fail to get out and participate. More than 50 million citizens of voting age failed to vote in the last national election. 3 million were turned away from the polls that attempted to vote. For different reasons, they were turned away and denied their right to vote.
Good morning, Congressman Lewis. Welcome to New Hampshire. My name is Wayne Jennings. I'm a past president of the Manchester NAACP. I'm also the founder of the New Hampshire Cultural Diversity Awareness Council. And one of the issues and problems that I'm trying to solve, something that's really dear to my heart, is the fact that there are no, at least last time I checked, there are no people of color, no attorneys of color employed by any of the major law firms in the state. Even here at the Law Center, you have African-American students coming in from around the country, but as soon as they graduate, they leave. First of all, I applaud Dean Broderick for inviting you here. And I was just wondering, is there anything that the Diversity Council, perhaps in collaboration with the Law Center, could do to change that situation, encourage law firms to recruit minorities?
Well, you just have to continue to work and talk to the partners at the different law firms and tell them you would like to see more women, more people of color, and don't give up. Don't be shy, and continue to hang in there. I've always said during the height of the civil rights movement, our effort is not an effort that lasts for 1 day, or 1 week, or 1 month, or 1 year, not even 1 semester, or 1 lifetime. You have to continue to push, continue to pull, and never, ever give up.
Thank you.
There's always hope.
Thank you.
Congressman Lewis, I am Joe Stanford. I'm a rising junior at Birmingham Southern College in Birmingham, Alabama. And
You're from Birmingham?
I am from Russellville, but I go to school in Birmingham.
In Birmingham.
Yes, sir.
It's a big city. That's North Alabama. You know, I grew up in Southeast
So, you know, kind of
Troy.
rural people, though. I know myself and you and many other people were saddened by the passing of Reverend Shuttlesworth this past year, and I was wondering what impact, if any, did he have on you?
Reverend Fred Shuttleworth had an unbelievable influence on so many of us. His leadership, his courage, his ability to stand up and speak out. The night when we were trapped in a church in Montgomery, the night of May 21st, 1961, at a mass meeting room, the same church where I first met Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy, it was Fred Shuttleworth that spoke up when a mob marched on the church, started throwing stink bombs and started burning U.S. Marshals' cars. And when Dr. King went down into the basement of the church and called Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, and it was Shuttleworth, this man, that held the audience there with his words. He was one of the most courageous individuals, daring. You know, his home was bombed, his church was bombed. He was beaten. He never became bitter, never became hostile. We lost an unbelievable leader, fighter, symbol of the struggle. And now you go flying to Birmingham. The Birmingham airport is renamed for Fred Shuttleworth. There's a life-size statue of him standing there at the Civil Rights Museum across from the church that was bombed on September the 15th, 1963, where the 4 little girls was killed. So he's revered and loved not only by the people of Birmingham, but people all around America.
Thank you.
Congressman, my name is Tom Ball. My son is graduating here today, and he thoughtfully included me in this festivity here. And I have to tell you, it's a real treat to be listening to you and hearing your remembrances. I have a two-part question about the philosophy of nonviolent protest. You've been in countless situations that surely tested your resolve about nonviolent protest. And my first question is, did you ever question your resolve and your adherence to the philosophy of nonviolent protest? And the second part of my question is, what role, if any, do you see for nonviolent protest in the modern world? It seems like it's a challenge in this society that we now live in, and I'm curious about your views on that as well.
Well, thank you very much for your question. Many years ago, I accepted nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. If you're struggling to create the beloved community, a community at peace with itself, if that is the end, if that is the goal, the way must be one of peace, one of love. Nonviolence for me is one of those immutable principles that you cannot deviate from, that you cannot give up on. Gandhi said, it is nonviolence or non-existence. Dr. King came along and said, we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we'll perish as fools. I think there is a role in the modern day society for the way of nonviolence. It's the burden of hate, the burden of division is too heavy a burden to bear. If you want lasting changes, you must follow the way of peace, the way of love, to move toward reconciliation. Let me give you maybe a little example here. On May 9, 1961, during the Freedom Rides. Some of you know the history that back in 1961, the Freedom Ride was based on a Supreme Court decision ending segregation and intrastate travel. Black people and white people could not be seated together on a Greyhound bus or a Trailway bus after they left Washington, D.C. and get into Virginia, or to travel through North Carolina or South Carolina, or Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. We go on our way to New Orleans, testing this decision for the United States Supreme Court. My young white seatmate, the two of us, riding the Greyhound bus, attempted to enter a so-called white waiting room in Rock Hill, South Carolina. It was marked white waiting, and a group of young men attacked us, beat us, and left us lying in a pool of blood. The local police officials came on the scene and asked whether we wanted to press charges. We said no. We believe in peace, nonviolence, and love. In February '09, a month after President Obama, less than a month after he was inaugurated, and a young white man, a little older than I am, but still young, maybe 2 or 3 years older, came to my office with his son. He said, "Mr. Lewis, I'm one of the individuals that beat you on May 9th in Rock Hill, South Carolina. I'm sorry. I want to apologize. Will you forgive me? Will you accept my apology?" And I said, yes. He started crying. His son started crying. He gave me a hug. His son gave me a hug. I hugged them two back, and I started crying. With three of us there together. And since then, I've seen this gentleman 4 more times in different parts of the country. That's an act of reconciliation. If I had returned violent, I don't know. I don't think that's what would have happened. That's what the movement was all about, to be reconciled. In a final analysis, we're just one people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Congressman Lewis, I'm Richard Stower. My wife was a member of the first class that graduated here at the law school. What you just said just affirms to me my judgment that you are one of my great heroes. You and other members of the entire civil rights movement made me who I am today. I was there in August of 1963. My high school biology teacher was Ann Schwerner, Mickey Schwerner's mother. One of my very good high school friends was the daughter of Whitney Young. So civil rights and the civil rights movement have been very important to me. Dr. King wrote his book, What Do We Do From Here, Chaos or Community? And that was in the context of legislation that had been passed in the 60s, the monumental civil rights legislation. And he was asking the question, okay, now that we have the laws on the books, where do we go from here? My question is, in light of the fact that our country has elected an African-American president, in light of the fact that over the past 50 years, the black middle class has grown significantly, what do you see as the civil rights imperative of today?
First of all, let me thank you for being you. Well, and thank you for your statement. You know, I got to know Mickey Schwerner, his mother, his wife, and the mother of all three of the civil rights workers, these three young men that was murdered in Mississippi on the night of June 21st, 1964. It is a very sad and dark chapter in our struggle. These three young men, two white, one African American, were just doing what they were committed to do to try to help people get registered to vote. The state of Mississippi had a black voting age population of more than 450,000. You know, only about 16,000 were registered to vote. They were stopped by the sheriff, arrested, taken to jail. Later that same evening, they were taken from jail, turned over to the Klan, beaten, shot, and killed. I tell young people all the time that these three young men didn't die in Vietnam. They didn't die in the Middle East or Africa or Central or South America or Eastern Europe. They died right here in our own country. There's a movement on the part of several of us in the Congress to try to get the Postal Service, we can't tell them what to do, but we're trying to influence it, to issue a stamp in honor of these three young men. In my collection of photographs, I have one of these three mothers. We made a lot of progress. We've come a distance, but we still have much progress that need to be made. And it's black folks, it's white folks, it's Latino, Asian American, Native American. There's still too many people in America that have been left out and left behind. We're not there yet. People need health care. Why are people resistant? I happen to believe that health care is a right. The people, I believe that. I don't know, and I cannot predict what the Supreme Court is going to do next month, but they're going to do something. But I just think that, as late Senator Kennedy would say from time to time, that the quality of a person's health care shouldn't be decided on the size of that person's bank account, or the size of that person's wallet, or the zip code the person lives in. There's still inequality when it comes, and an unbelievable disparity when it comes to health care, to education. We have to do something about it. I think the American people should take a great deal of pride and embrace the changes that have occurred, but build on it. Build on it. And let's go much further. When you think about our history, that at one point women were denied the right to vote, African American, People couldn't participate. And we've been opening up the process. And with the help of lawyers, we've witnessed what I like to call a nonviolent revolution in America. But we still must go further. To see the President of the United States and the Vice President and several members of Congress and others saying that we must get marriage equality for the gay community. You cannot build a wall. You cannot say it's going to be okay for one segment of our society, but not all right for another segment. Equality is equality. I don't know how I got on this point, but I tell you this, when people ask me questions about this and that and about marriage equality, I said, Dr. King used to say in the South, during the late 50s and early 60s, people would ask him about interracial marriage. And Dr. King would say, races don't fall in love and get married. Individuals fall in love and get married. So if two guys or two women want to fall in love and get married, no government, state or federal, should tell them what they cannot do. But we need another nonviolent revolution in America. People are too quiet. We're just too doing quiet. We need to make some noise. And I think it's significant that we have come to the point that we elected a person of color as president. And we should embrace it and take a great deal of pride in what will come. But there's still miles to travel. Yes, sir. I'm sorry that I went on so long.
No, it's a great pleasure. I'm John Bennett, Congressman Lewis, and thank you for being here. I came out of this place in 1977. There's my constitutional law professor sitting next to you.
Yes, yes.
And yesterday, a number of us were able to revisit the experience of being in one of his classes, which was wonderful. And what he did was he started off with the legal basis or the legal progress, if you will, of the freedom rides, the cases upon which it was based, as you described, and tied it very nicely with the practical is probably the wrong word, but the physical acts that you and others undertook. We're here in a law school, and clearly this is based, the entire movement, and then and now, is based on fundamental justice, fundamental principles. And I would be interested to have your insights on the part of the movement and going forward, as you've just said, as to what lawyers did and can do. I realize some of them laid down probably in the pools of blood as well. But I'd be interested in some insights about what was going on, what the strategy was, what the legal parts were that you were considering before you went out there on the bus, and what lawyers can do to contribute to the ongoing movement, if you would, the practical part, because they're all here. We were all here trying to get that education, and I'd be interested in insights on how to apply that.
Well, before we went on the ride, the 13 of us, in May of 1961, as a matter of fact, on May 1st, 1961, was a biracial group that met in Washington, D.C. And we had a discussion about the decision of the Supreme Court. But I don't think any of us on the trip were lawyers. So we knew one thing, at least we believed, that we had the protection of that decision. And someplace along the way, from time to time, people said the Supreme Court decision said that we can do such and such a thing. And the police officer in Mississippi or someplace else would say, I don't give you know what about that decision. You cannot come in here, you cannot go there, you move on. And at the same time, we're placing us under arrest. We wanted to bring down those signs that said white waiting, colored waiting, white men, white women, colored women, on the buses, in the waiting rooms, at the ticket counters. We went through a period of training. I remember the last night in Washington, the night of May 3rd. We went to a little Chinese restaurant for a meal. Growing up in rural Alabama, I never had Chinese food before. I was new in Nashville. And it was a wonderful, wonderful meal. But that evening, someone said, you should eat well. This may be like the Last Supper. And we boarded those buses. We were beaten by an angry mob in Montgomery. 2 of us beaten in Rock Hill. One young man, Dean, attempted to get a shoe shine at a Greyhound bus station in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he went into a so-called white waiting room that had a barber shop, and he tried to get a shoe shine. He was arrested and taken to jail. The next morning, he went before a local judge, and this judge had the good sense to dismiss the case, just like that. But we get to Montgomery, we're beaten and left bloody, and President Kennedy have to call out the U.S. Marshals, and the National Guards came out to protect us. And the governor of Alabama at the time was a man by the name of John Patterson. He told his aides that if President Kennedy called to tell the aides of President Kennedy that he was out in the Gulf fishing and he couldn't be reached. On May 20th last year, for the reunion of the Freedom Riders in Montgomery, Governor Patterson, who's in his 90s now, came and apologized to us and helped save the old Greyhound bus station, and now it is a civil rights museum in downtown Montgomery. I remember after we got out of jail, out of prison, many of us were sent to the state penitentiary in Parchment, Mississippi. It's the worst place. It's just bad. We filled the city jail, the county jail. More than 300 people were arrested. Lawyers, rabbis, priests, ministers, college professors. They came from all across America. But I went back to Nashville, and I met Thurgood Marshall. I've seen him before. And I got on the rail, there was a panel at Fisk University. And Thurgood Marshall said, John, it doesn't make, he used colorful words similar to President Johnson. And I won't use it here at the law school what he said. But he said in so many words that we should stop the Freedom Ride. It doesn't make any blah, blah sense for you all to continue to get beaten and get arrested and go to jail. And we just get one case and take it to the Supreme Court. And I said, well, Mr. Marshall, we're trying to create a mass movement. And I appreciate what you're saying. And many of the lawyers understood that. But to really respond to your question, there was lawyers that literally put their bodies on the line in Alabama, in Mississippi, and all across the South. And many lawyers from the North came south and volunteered to defend us, to participate in that effort. There was one young man in Birmingham named Arthur D. Shore, the lawyer there. His home was bombed more than once. The area where he lived, there was the bombing of so many African-American homes, they would call Birmingham Birmingham. There was a young man named C.B. King, a lawyer in South Georgia. He went down to inquire about one of the people who had been arrested, and the sheriff hit him in the head with a stick. So it was dangerous for lawyers to be doing what they attempted to do, to defend all of us. And there's a role for lawyers to play today. This election coming up, I think there's a deliberate, systematic attempt to steal this election before it takes place. And I think we're going to need a lot of lawyers to be out there, prepared to file injunctions and getting polling places to stay open, and just trying to get local election officials to follow the law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Me ask, several of these questions have focused on how do we move forward from where we are. And in reflecting on what you've said on your book and on my understanding of history, without the student movement of which you were a part in Nashville, without SNCC, without the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, it may have taken a good many decades before we got to the Civil Rights Act, before we got the progress to which you referred. So my question is, where is SNCC today? Where is the student movement? And to the extent that it's not what it was, that was a different time, a different set of problems, to be sure, but where is SNCC today?
Well, there is not that SNCC type movement today. I think during that period, we call ourselves a circle of trust, a band of brothers and sisters. We were committed. We were believers. We really wanted to change America. We wanted to do what Dr. King called redeem the soul of America, of what some of us call today to create a more perfect union. And we were prepared to die for that. When we went on the Freedom Ride, we didn't know whether we would return. We didn't have wheels, but we wrote letters saying, if this happened to me, this is what to do. I had never been to Mississippi before when I went on the Freedom Ride. The great majority of the people on the Freedom Ride never been inside of the state. The majority of the people that came to and participated in the Mississippi Freedom Summer never been there. But the young people of that period had this sense of urgency. It was just freedom, freedom now. I remember when I spoke at the March on Washington on August 28, 1963, part of the speech I said, we want our freedom and we want it now. You tell us to wait. We cannot wait. We cannot be patient. It was a sense of now. And I think we have lost that sense of now. I do think the young people, black and white, and the hundreds and thousands of people that participated in protests outside of the South, but in support of what was going on in the South, helped to speed up, to increase the tempo. People who were demanding action on the part of the federal government during the crisis in Selma. I remember President Johnson saying on one occasion, he said, my daughter, his younger daughter Lucy, cannot sleep at night because people are singing, "We Shall Overcome," outside of the White House. There were protests all over Washington. 2 days after the violence in Selma, there was demonstration in more than 80 cities in America on almost every major college or university campus. It was a sense of urgency. And I think sometimes we tend to lose that.
It's a shame. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Congressman, my name is Harry Willis. I'm also a member of the class of 1977. Let me say it's an honor to be here and to listen to you. It's my impression that there are a lot of American citizens who believe in a misguided fashion that civil rights is something that happened 50 or 60 years ago and that it's been accomplished. But besides that, I see a new racism rearing its head in this country, and it's aimed at minorities of all kinds. You touched on this in your answer a few minutes ago. Latino Americans, Asian Americans, Muslim Americans, whose numbers are increasing in relation to white Americans. And I see that as there are a lot of people, I believe, that don't like President Obama, not necessarily because of his policies, or not necessarily because he's black, but because he represents cultures that just plain aren't like us. And I'm wondering what you see as the way to address that and to overcome those attitudes in America today.
I think it's important that as citizens, and as not just citizens of America, but as citizens of the world, that those of us who live on this little planet, who live on this little piece of real estate, we have an obligation to do what we can to say that we all are here together, that maybe our foremothers and our forefathers came here in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. That it's in our best interest to look out for each other, to care for each other. And it really makes me sick when I hear some of my colleagues in the Congress saying that the president is un-American, that he's not one of us. What do you mean by saying that? What do you mean by saying we want our country back? Back from where? Where? So I think we should take a great deal. The rest of the world is very proud of the success and the progress we've made. We have to embrace it. We just need to keep talking, teaching each other. I wish we could conduct a nationwide nonviolent workshop, and that we all participate in it, that we have role playing and social drama like we did during the 60s. Maybe somebody, the Congress is not the place to lead it, but I think the Congress would be better off if we all could attend some nonviolent workshop and maybe engage in some dialogue, maybe some human relation workshop. How do you get along with someone on the other side of the aisle?
Thank you.
We all just have to continue to work. Press on.
Thank you.
Congressman Lewis, just reiterating what others have said, I'm privileged to teach here, and it's just such an honor and a privilege to have you here at the school. You've made mention of the preciousness of the right to vote, and then subsequently you suggested concern that there's already an effort underway to affect the outcome of the upcoming election. And we read in the paper about efforts in state houses around the country to combat voter fraud. There's controversy about voter ID laws. It strikes me, given technological advancements, that there is absolutely no reason in the 21st century why voting should not be a straightforward process and a process that we have full confidence in. And my question to you is, do you see any role for the federal government to play, given our history, to take that issue off the table, to reform the exercise of the franchise in this country, and so that we all may be confident in the integrity of our electoral process?
I do see a role, a major role for the federal government to play, especially when it comes to federal election. And some of the lawyers here, constitutional lawyers, but is it possible for the federal government to say to state, county, and local government, these are the steps, these are the procedures that you must follow? Now, when it comes to congressional election, or to the election of a president, I think there is a role, and we have legal standing, but can we set up? Can we have a uniformity of procedure for registering to vote, how long you keep the polling places open. I think there is a need for the federal government to step in.
And I teach constitutional law. On the other side of that, I do believe that there is an argument to be made for enforcement of the fundamental right to vote that would legitimize federal involvement. I don't think that that's a stretch as a constitutional argument.
Well,
We have time for one more question.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, sharing your time. My name's Bob McKenzie. I'm also a graduate of the 77 class here. My question, I'm going to say it first, and then if I can just say a little bit after the question. What are your thoughts on how we can encourage the generations that follow us to act in the interests of the world and peace and brotherhood and all that kind of thing? I am a parent, and I admire and appreciate the selflessness of what lots of other folks have done. I try to lead by example. Sometimes I'm more successful, sometimes I'm less successful. But I'm concerned about the legacy we leave for those that follow us. And I'd be interested in your thoughts as to what I, as a parent, might do or say or model for my children in order to promote a better world.
Well, I think the best example of the way we live, children, you know, they come into this world, they're so innocent. We're not born putting someone down because of their race, or their color, their religion, their nationality, or sexual orientation. I think we come in here, we're born free, clean, innocent, and something go wrong from time to time. Environment, I think we have to teach, sensitize, educate, inspire our young people. I just finished a little book, and I'm plugging this book. That was published on the 15th. It's just a little book of inspiration. Across the Bridge. And there's lessons learned. And I talk about patience. I talk about love, reconciliation, peace. We have to teach our children. I think in our schools, whether they be public or private, that we should teach the way of love. And politicians, we should talk about love. We should talk about living a wholesome life, create an environment where we love people, love each other, to be thoughtful, to be considered. I tell little children, and I speak to hundreds and thousands of young people back in my own district, school, elementary school, kindergarten, middle school, high school, see them on the Hill in D.C., show them a video. Sometimes I get down on the floor. The little school I went to a few days ago in Atlanta, 300 kids that look like the United Nations. They're black, they're white, they're Latino, Asian American, come from all parts of the world, and they're smart. You get there, I get down on the floor, I sit there, and I wonder whether I'm going to be able to get up, but I do. And these kids, they ask you some of the unbelievable questions. They get it. And we have to reinforce that. I think at a very young age, we need to teach people the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. Our country,
Thank you.
and our society, and our world will be better.
Now, you've been practicing that sermon since you were 12. Did the chickens ever agree with you?
Oh, I think they did. I think they did.
You need to know before he responds to that as a young boy, he envisioned himself as a minister and practiced with the chickens in the chicken coop. So you chickens have been exposed today. So that's to what I was referring.
Well, you're right. When I was a young child growing up in Alabama, it was my responsibility to care for the chickens, and I fell in love with raising chickens like no one else could raise chickens. And from time to time, with the help of my brothers and sisters and cousins, we would gather all of our chickens together like you gather here in the hall. And my sisters and brothers and cousins would line the outside of the chicken yard. But they helped make up the audience, the congregation. And I would start speaking or preaching. And when I look back on it, some of those chickens that I would speak to or preach to during the 40s and the 50s, some would bow their heads, some would shake their heads, and they never quite said amen. But I'm convinced that some of those chickens that I preached to tended to listen to me much better than some of my colleagues listen to me today in the Congress. And some of them are a little more productive.
Thank you very much, Congressman.
Thank you, sir.